You're bleeding. No pad, no tampon, no bathroom, no privacy. You're walking, hunting, carrying a child, sleeping on the ground, and none of that stops just because your body decided today was the day. There's no drugstore. There's no medication for the cramps doubling you over. There's no way to just disappear for a few days. The group needs you. The walk continues. The work doesn't pause. So what did you do? A woman living to 70 in a hunter-gatherer band, without modern birth control, no plastic, no soap, no hot running water, no antiseptic to prevent infection from unclean materials pressed against skin for hours. Blood attracts predators by scent, and she was living in landscapes with lions, wolves, and bears that could smell it from a distance. She couldn't stop moving because the group moved every few days chasing food. She couldn't isolate herself completely because isolation in the wild meant death. And it wasn't just the blood, it was the pain. Cramps that today send women to bed with heating pads and ibuprofen had to be endured mid-hike, mid-hunt, mid-childcare, with nothing but whatever plants she'd learned worked, if anything worked at all. By every modern standard, this should have been a monthly crisis, a recurring wound with no real way to treat it, in a body that couldn't afford to stop functioning. And yet women survived this, generation after generation, for hundreds of thousands of years, long before anyone invented anything resembling modern hygiene. So how did they actually manage it? It started with what the land gave them. Archaeologists studying hunter-gatherer groups have found that women used soft moss, shredded bark, dried grass, and animal hide scraps as absorbent material, pressed close to the body or held in place with a simple strap of hide tied around the waist and between the legs. Moss in particular is naturally absorbent and was used this way well into recorded history. Sami and Inuit communities in the Arctic were documented using moss for exactly this purpose, right up until the last century. And there's no reason to think the practice is new. It's almost certainly tens of thousands of years old, just made from materials that rot and vanish, which is part of why we don't have direct archaeological proof going back further. Soft, absorbent, replaceable, and free. It's the same logic behind a modern pad, just built from the forest floor instead of a factory. The second tool was rhythm and prediction, not treatment. Women in close-knit groups who live and eat together tend to sync their cycles due to shared environment and hormone cues, a phenomenon still debated today, but observed in many communities. In a small band of 15 to 50 people, the other women likely knew roughly when it was coming, which meant support could be arranged in advance. Extra hide scraps set aside, a lighter workload quietly offered. This wasn't a medical system, it was a social one. Women passing down knowledge to younger women about what to expect, what materials worked best, and how to manage the days ahead before they even arrived. The third tool, and this one surprises people, was the plants themselves. Ethnobotanical records from indigenous groups across Africa, the Americas, and Australia show women used specific herbs, teas, and roots believed to ease cramping and heavy bleeding, passed down through oral tradition long before anyone wrote a word of it down. We can't verify all of it worked the way they believed. Some of it likely did nothing. But some of these plants contain real anti-inflammatory compounds that modern science has only recently confirmed, meaning ancient women may have stumbled onto working remedies purely through generations of trial and error, the same way they learned which berries were poisonous and which weren't. The fourth piece was seclusion, but not the kind that meant abandonment. In many documented indigenous cultures, from parts of Nepal to the Pacific Northwest to sub-Saharan Africa, menstruating women stayed in a separate hut or shelter during their cycle, often called a moon lodge or menstrual hut. On the surface, this looks like exclusion, but look closer, and it was often the opposite. These spaces gave women a break from hunting, gathering, and childcare duties during the days their bodies needed it most. Food was frequently brought to them by other women in the group. It functioned less like punishment and more like the world's oldest maternity leave, one built entirely around the rhythm of the body instead of ignoring it. And this is where the real answer starts to show itself. The group didn't just tolerate this, it planned around it. A pattern-based society built its schedule around the reality of half its population bleeding on a predictable cycle every single month for their entire adult lives. That's not a footnote to survival. That's infrastructure. Here's the part that gets skipped in almost every telling of prehistoric life. Some anthropologists argue the menstrual cycle itself may have shaped early human cooperation. If women were reliably out a full hunting rotation for several days a month, every month, for decades, that means someone else had to consistently step up, sharing food, sharing childcare, sharing protection. Not as a favor, as a system. A group that couldn't figure out how to support that rhythm didn't last. A group that could, did. In a very real sense, learning to plan around the menstrual cycle may have been one of the earliest forms of organized human cooperation, long before agriculture, long before permanent shelters, long before anything we'd recognize as civilization. There's also a darker layer worth being honest about. Managing blood in the wild wasn't just uncomfortable, it carried real risk. Infection from unclean materials could be lethal in a world without antibiotics. Blood scent could draw predators toward camp. Severe cramping with no pain relief could leave a woman temporarily unable to defend herself or flee. Some women almost certainly died from complications we'd consider minor today. Survival here wasn't guaranteed. It was managed, imperfectly, generation after generation, through nothing but shared knowledge and the materials the land provided. So what actually made this survivable wasn't one invention. It was the fact that early humans never treated the body as something to fight against. They built the group around it instead. Moss and bark solved the material problem. Shared knowledge between women solved the prediction problem. Rest spaces solved the physical toll. And a cooperative group that redistributed work solved the part no single woman could ever solve alone. Survival here wasn't about toughing it out in silence. It was about a group of people deciding, generation after generation, that this was worth planning for. And here's what's almost funny about where we ended up. For hundreds of thousands of years, managing a period required an entire support system. Other women, shared labor, a place to rest, passed down knowledge older than written language itself. Today, it requires walking into a store and picking a box off a shelf, alone, in under 2 minutes, no one else involved at all. We didn't just solve the problem, we privatized it. And in doing that, we quietly lost the one thing that made it bearable in the first place: other people who already knew exactly what you were going through.